Ladies and gentlemen, kicking off the first stop on his world tour, our new president and prophet, Russell M. Nelson! You say you want some revelation, well, here you go. It's gonna blow your freaking mind.
Greetings, brothers and sisters. Welcome to the weekly Mormon News Roundup, where Al and D-Days are going to ruminate on the great and spacious beehive. It's May 28th, 2023. This is episode 61, where we're going to talk about President Oak's young adult devotional. A Latter-day Saint has won American Idol, and the Cody Wyoming temple is stirring controversy, and the most closeted state in the United States has been revealed. Now, if you want to get in touch with us, we have a website here. We're at www.mormonnewsroundup.org or www.mormonnewsroundup.com, and you can interact with us here. Or you can send us an email to kolob@mormonnewsroundup.org. Now, if you want to support this podcast, we'd be very grateful for that. We do have a Patreon site where we'd be very grateful if you came over and visited our Patreon site and made a donation. That'd be great. Now, I'd like to welcome onto this program a longtime co-host, Al. Al, how's it going?
Oh, I'm so glad to be back. And good to hear your voice again, Vives. Thank you for having me.
Yes, longtime co-host, listener favorite Al is back on the program. Hey, Al, can you just, you don't use a webcam. Can you just tell us the reasoning behind that?
Yeah, I just need to protect my own anonymity a little bit. Just looking to, this is one of the reasons why I've taken a step back is this podcast is taking a step in the right direction of going with video, and I'm just not comfortable showing my face out there to the world, especially living in a very highly dense LDS area. So this is one of the reasons why I've taken a big step back.
And also could have impacts in your job because you still work in the in Utah, right?
I do, and like most businesses around Utah, it's owned by an LDS member, if not the church itself. So, yeah.
Definitely. Now, we're on Twitter. We're at @NewsMormon on Twitter. If you want to get in touch with us there, we release all of our episodes there. Now, we did a big episode last week here, Al, which was released. We did a big deep dive into the 60 Minutes, our church's response to the 60 Minutes expose. We had on Ryan McKnight and Colby Reddish. We went through the entire blow by blow of the 60 Minutes episode. The only problem is that it got a copyright strike. So we released the full audio of that is on Apple Podcasts. It's on Spotify. It's on a lot of different listening platforms. But if you want the full video on it now, we had to edit that video down on YouTube to get the copyright. The full video is available on our Patreon site there without ads. It's 2 hours and 44 minutes long. Whereas we were only able to leave up like an hour of the YouTube content. So that's a couple of housekeeping things. Anything else that I've left off?
I don't think so, but yeah, that was definitely a juicy episode last week. Big news, big.
It was tremendous to get Ryan McKnight, who was right in the middle of all of it, onto the program. And obviously, we had he's an accountant. He's a founder of Mormon Leaks. It's a fantastic episode, one of our very, very best. And we had Colby Reddish, who he's a lawyer. You know, we're dealing with a lot of legal issues. Mormonism Live, Mormon Stories, they had nothing on the Mormon News Roundup when it came to covering the 60 Minutes episode. We did a fantastic job. You can watch the full video on Patreon. Just any quick thoughts? Did you watch the 60 Minutes episode, Al?
I did, and I think that the Mormon News Roundup did a great job covering it.
And I'm going to double your pay for saying that. Now, before we get now some follow-ups here, we have the sentencing date here has been set for Lori Vallow Daybell, the doomsday mom here, and along with Chad Daybell, it's been set, and she was found guilty on May 12th of conspiracy to commit murder and first-degree murder of her children, and she is going to go ahead and get sentenced on July 31st in the Fremont County Courthouse. There's going to be a number of victim impact statements, and Ms. Daybell is going to be allowed to speak if she so wishes. You know, as we know, the death penalty is off of the table for this particular case, so I would be very surprised if we didn't get anything in this except for a life in prison. Any thoughts on this case here, Al?
Yeah, so I've been following this Lori Daybell trial, and it seems like the audio they were releasing on a couple-day delay, and she chose to. It's her constitutional right to not defend herself or speak at all, and I think that was the right thing to do. I'll tell you though, her defense counsel seemed a little amateur and elementary. So I think that if she does appeal, she's going to appeal on the grounds of ineffective counsel, and I think that's a shame.
Yeah, I mean, I followed it as well. I don't know what the council was trying to do because they didn't have much to fight for one thing.
Yeah.
I mean, I just don't know what defense that they didn't end up putting on very much of a defense. That the prosecution took like 2 weeks. The defense took like 2 days.
Yeah.
I mean, you're on trial for your life here.
They didn't bring a single witness.
No.
No, they just kept trying to attack the prosecution's witnesses, but not very effectively.
I mean, no, obviously, I think we're going to see a life in prison sentence on July 31st.
I'll be shocked if we don't.
And I honestly wonder if with Chad Daybell, whether they're going to come to, because his trial is going to be coming up, if they're going to come to some kind of a plea agreement to spare us for another trial because the evidence is just so overwhelming. Let's just spare the families of going through it again, of the victims, of everyone who was involved, and let's just probably just get these folks behind bars for hopefully a very long time.
Oh, certainly. The person that really needs to get some justice here is Chad Daybell's murdered wife. I really feel for her. Yeah, Tammy. I really feel for that lady.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely horrible. Now, our next article here is Dallin Oaks. This is our featured article here. Dallin Oaks is in the news. He gave the young adult devotional here just this last week here. Big, filled the conference center, totally full there. Lots of people involved. And he and his wife gave a worldwide devotional for young adults. Sister Kristen Oaks, President Dallin H. Oaks, the first counselor in the first presidency, gave a long devotional here that was specifically geared for young adults. And this is kind of in the same vein as President Nelson, who did a young adult devotional last year. You remember we covered that pretty well, right, Al?
Yeah, we did.
Yeah. So they usually do these, they usually do them once a year with some member of the first presidency here. And all I can say is, Al, when nothing inspires today's young adults like a couple of white multi-millionaire nonagenarians. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. That's one of the first glaring things about this is you're getting people that are way on in years, almost in wheelchair, giving advice to all the young kids of today about what they should do. And, pull up your pants and go get a haircut sort of advice, right?
I just remember Dallin Oaks was born in 1932. 1932. You're giving adult advice to young adults. The thing about other churches have figured this out. They have young adult pastors, and usually they bring people in who are like, I don't know, in their 20s or early 30s for the children's pastors, for the young adult pastors. The problem is the church with the ordination system, they don't have anyone of senior stature who's like below 70.
Exactly. And I mean, on the ward levels, they had like young men's presidents or elders quorum presidents, something where they could call someone in their 20s and 30s. But when it comes to the upper echelons, it's such a, like, you have to outlive everybody else in order to get in there. So it's the last man standing philosophy. It really is. Yeah. And that's the way it was set up by Brigham Young. He wanted it that way.
Yeah, he did. We're still feeling the repercussions of that. Now, there's a lot of clips that we could bring up in this. I just want to play one clip here for us to discuss. Okay. And this was the legendary story that he allegedly got a letter from a young woman who had a number of concerns, and it ends up being in the video, they end up dramatizing it. And I find the contents of this letter to be very interesting. Let's play this letter for you and get some reaction here.
I feel like I sometimes get inconsistent and confusing messages from the church. In my day-to-day life, I see members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints on social media act as if they aren't part of this gospel. I feel like I'm the only young woman in my ward who sees the things I see wrong with the world. I truly don't understand why so many youth in our church don't see any problem with people changing their gender every other day, dating people who are the same sex or identify as no gender. At ward or stake youth activities, I am asked my pronouns, or at school, I am asked to dance with a girl who thinks she is a boy. I know we are supposed to love everyone and show them respect, and I always do. I just feel that there is a line being crossed. I wish we heard more talk from church leaders about this problem.
This is a letter from a young woman who's about the age of the high school seniors in this audience. Why does her letter strike me so profoundly? She wants to do what is right, but she feels surrounded by values and behaviors she feels to be wrong, and she just doesn't know what to do about it. She wants to stand for truth, but she doesn't know how to do it with love.
Okay, so reading or watching this clip, this is obviously a letter from a young woman who's extremely involved in the church and running into some of the difficulties of living in the world but not being of the world. And these are really common problems that teenagers face, is how to get along with people who don't have the same faith that you do, but also, not be the outcast weirdo. You want to be accepted amongst society, but you also don't want to have to compromise on your own morals and your own values. So I completely empathize with this letter, whether this letter is authentic or not. There's no way of knowing. I mean, the church has, in fact, said that they fabricate things from time to time. I mean, Paul H. Dunn built an entire reputation on that. But that's just that's neither here nor there. This could be a legitimate letter, and it is a legitimate concern, regardless.
It's definitely a legendary letter. It's amazing to me that Dallin Oaks gets a letter that literally checks every single one of the boxes that he has been on the soapbox for the past 20 years. He finds the perfect letter that is written to him by an anonymous young lady that actually goes through every one of his, I don't know if you want to call them pet peeves or his soapbox or his passion, the things that he's passionate about. He just finds a letter that actually resonates with that. I find that to be rather coincidental.
Yeah, it is. Lucky for him. And so that's why it raises my eyebrow a little bit, whether it's authentic or not. But hey, there's still at least 1 million active LDS people in this world, but probably at least 250,000 young women. It could be a legitimate letter.
I mean, I think most estimates put it between 4 and 6 million active members.
So I figure there's at least got to be 250,000 active young women, right?
Yeah, I do wonder why don't we have a name for this letter? In the Ensign, when you send your letter into the Ensign or the New Era or the Friend, it used to be called the Children's Friend. I'm sorry, not the Ensign, the Liahona now. I've got to get the Liahona. When you send those letters in, they will put your name in there. How come we don't ever get to hear her name? How come we never get to hear a lot of the legendary stories that we hear in General Conference from young women's addresses, young single adult addresses? We never get to hear who they are, anything about them, so that we could say, hey, follow up with her and say, hey, how did you feel about President Oaks answering your question there? We never get to know any of that information.
Oh, well, that's not important. We don't care how she was satisfied. He answered it, therefore she's satisfied, right?
I guess. I guess. I don't know. That's why I would love to follow up. See, one other thing that she wrote in that little passage is she said she wishes that the leaders of the church spoke more about this. And I find this to be a very interesting statement, because is that not criticizing leaders of the church? She said, I wish they spoke more about it, meaning that they aren't speaking enough about it. That's a criticism of the church. But President Oaks has repeatedly said that any criticism of the church, that it's wrong and that you need to repent. And yet in the letter, she's literally criticizing him, leaders of the church. But the irony, did he just miss that? Or what do you think?
And her criticism is that the leaders of the church aren't saying enough. Obviously, this is a young lady who's very steeped in her study of her religion and watching General Conference. They speak very frequently and constantly about this stuff. So once again, it's just something that raises my eyebrow again. Like, you don't think that they talk about this enough? I mean, this is a huge topic of every conference and every devotional, and pay more attention, I guess. Stop doodling in your notebook and start taking notes. It's they're talking about this all the time.
Yeah, they are. And she talks about how the people, this legendary young woman here, she talks about how the people who she's surrounded with, which are presumably other members of the church, or I don't know, the people at her school, they're changing genders every single day. So on Monday, they're a boy. On Tuesday, they're a girl. On Wednesday, they're a boy. On Thursday, they're a girl. You know what? I don't know that much about the trans community, but from my understanding, that's not really how the way that things work. That seems to be a straw man of people changing genders, of a person changing their gender every single day.
Very much so. It's that's a straw man argument for sure. And it might be that this young lady just is that ignorant, sheltered, doesn't have a lot of real experience with people. It's very uncomfortable that she was asked to dance by a girl who identifies as a boy, who's attracted to girls, I would assume. But it seems like there's a little bit more respect within the LGBTQ community regarding attraction. They want people to be open to a relationship with them, but they don't want to necessarily force someone into a situation that's going to make them uncomfortable, just like they didn't want to be forced into a traditional gender role that made them uncomfortable, right?
Yeah. In the letter, the young lady, she said that she seems to decry the idea of choosing one's pronouns. That seems to be an implicit or something that you can extrapolate that, asking people their pronouns, that's against her values. And Oakes, he doesn't refute that at all. He seems to be complicit in that. And the reason that I find that important is the fact that just in the last couple of weeks, the church updated the trans policy in the handbook. And it used to be that you couldn't refer to people by their preferred pronouns, but now you can. So this is why I don't understand why we have a letter here where she says, I'm tired of people asking me about my pronouns. Well, that's perfectly acceptable, even according to the church handbook.
Sure.
So that's why I don't understand.
Oh, she is a stellar member, I'll tell you. This young lady, she certainly caught the eye of Elder Oakes.
Yeah, a stellar lady would know the church handbook and know that the church has no issues whatsoever with calling people by their preferred pronouns. Yeah. So, I mean, why did we update the trans policy if we seem to be decrying that in the clip? It doesn't make any sense. Now, the other thing that Elder Oakes here says is no matter what other people's values are, no matter what their sexual orientation is, no wonder what their gender identity is, that we need to treat other people with kindness. He spends a great deal of time in the devotional talking about the two great commandments of love God and love others as yourself. And I think that is a great sentiment. I think we should treat others with kindness, whether they share our values, morals, or whether they don't. I think, for instance, that anyone should be treated with values, with respect, regardless of their upbringing or anything with regards to that. And this is why I want to get into this point, is because if you go back and look at the history of Dallin Oakes and how he has treated others with who were different than himself, we have this famous quote that was from, I believe, a question and answer, where he talked about somebody wrote into him and asked him about what they should do if they had a gay son and their partner wanted to come over and visit. And Dallin Oakes said, quote, don't expect to stay overnight. Don't expect to be a lengthy house guest. Don't expect us to take you out and introduce you to our friends, or to deal with you in a public situation that would imply our approval of your lifestyle. Is that how we treat others who are different than us, with kindness?
Kindness, it sounds like that's trying your best to put up with somebody by... That's a rather hostile environment to bring them into. You can spend the night, but don't stay very long. And, don't expect us to parade you around and introduce you to our friends. We're going to hide you in the closet if any company comes over, right? It's ridiculous. So, is the golden rule just a dead thing, to treat others the way we would want to be treated? Would Elder Oakes want to be treated that way by a member of his community? If he went to a traditional believing LDS home, and all of a sudden their non-LDS neighbors come over, and they try to keep him back in the back room, and watch a church movie back here, but keep the volume down. We don't want anybody to know that you're here. Is he going to feel loved, and is that going to be kindness, or is he going to be offended by that? Is he going to feel slighted by that? Because that slighting behavior. And it just sounds like really, it really sounds like this stereotypical old man way of doing things. It's my way or the highway. You can come into my house, but be danged if you're going to eat any of my food.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And unfortunately, it gets much worse than that, because Elder Oaks was the center of the electroshock therapy. There's quite a bit of controversy about this. And this is an article here that's on Blade Magazine here, which says that the Church of Jesus Christ no longer practices electroshock therapy or attempts to change someone's gender orientation. But back in Charlottesville, I think that was, what was that, 2021, he took some questions here. And he said, quote, "Let me say that electroshock treatments at BYU, when I became president of BYU, they had been discontinued earlier, and it never went on during my administration." And he denied that the electroshock, quote unquote, therapy was used on gay BYU students while he was president from 1971 to 1980. But there's been a lot of reporting from the Salt Lake Tribune and others that have really mostly refuted that claim.
It's an outright lie. I mean, he expects us to believe that electroshock therapy, let's say it ended in 1970 because it had been discontinued before he took over, and then it started up again in 81. I don't think so.
I don't know if it started up again in 1981, but the Salt Lake Tribune wrote in an article around the same time frame in November 2021 that Latter-day Saint leader Dallin H. Oaks categorically denied that BYU had used electroshock therapies on gay students during his tenure from 1971 to 1980. Individuals and research say otherwise.
Yeah, individuals. There are personal testimonials out there of people who suffered at the hands of BYU in the basement of the Smith Family Living Center, that they were there. So he's calling them all liars, saying, "Oh no, that never happened." Well, they say it did, and they've got the scars to prove it.
The Lambda Law Alliance tweeted this out at the same time that Elder Oaks was invited to the University of Virginia in 2021. They said that Lambda believes that this is the Gay Law Alliance at University of Virginia.
Yeah.
Lambda believes that it is dangerous to invite individuals with views openly hostile to the humanity of UVA's law LGBTQ students to speak, particularly on issues of religious freedom and its intersection with LGBTQ rights. So, I mean, he's a very polarizing figure when it comes to LGBTQ issues, but he's saying that we need to be treating people with kindness. But I don't understand how electroshock therapy, I don't know how that's treating someone with kindness. That seems like about the worst thing that you could possibly do to another human being.
Especially since it doesn't work. Exactly. I mean, really all it is just torturing a person for feeling the way that they are, for having the carnal instinctual responses that nature gave them.
The Salt Lake Tribune has reported on individuals, and the documents have been drug up here. The Oaks signed off on it, or at least this is important. His signature was affixed to the study's approval. Now, I have been on a number of doctoral committees. I've been on dozens of doctoral committees in my academic lifetime. Let me tell you that as a committee member, you're mostly familiar with the studies that you're involved in. You send that over to the dean, and the dean gets thousands of these things, and he probably doesn't review them very thoroughly. And then the president of the university has to sign off on it too. We're talking about, people say, yeah, his signature's on there. Let me tell you this. Look, just because your signature's put on something does not mean that you're aware of it. Okay, that is a fundamental fact. That's not excusing your behavior, because if your signature is affixed to something, you are saying that you are responsible for that. So we don't know the level of involvement that he had with these, but going back to the Young Single Adult Devotional, his whole point was treating people with kindness, and the electroshock therapy, that is the absolute opposite of that.
Absolutely. And it's possible that his signature was just a stamp. I remember when I was a child, my dad was a surveyor in his spare time. And so he had to fix his signature to a lot of blueprints and plat layouts and stuff, just to say, yeah, I've measured this property and stuff. He didn't want to sign his name all that much. So he had a rubber stamp made, and he just, stamp it on the ink pad and then stamp it and be done. And so I'm sure that that's a possibility. Not everybody's going to read thoroughly everything. Maybe he didn't know the details about it, but it still happened. You can't just go out there and deny that it didn't.
That is true. And see, when it comes to Elder Oaks was asked about that, the Salt Lake Tribune reached out to him back in 2021 for a response. And according to church spokesperson Doug Anderson, quote, Oaks declined to comment on the discrepancy between his memory and the research, end quote. And then the church's representative pointed to the phase 2 2016 public statement, which we already covered, which says that the church does not endorse, the church denounces any therapy, including conversion, reparative therapies, and that subjects an individual to abusive practices, not only in Utah, but throughout the world. So he declined to comment on the discrepancy between what he said at the University of Virginia, which is overwhelming consensus of research and individuals shows that there was electroshock therapy during the time that he was at BYU, and with what he said that it never took place. So you could clear all of this up by saying, look, I should never have put my signature on that. I should have paid more attention to the doctoral studies that were going on under my tenure and apologize. That's how you take ownership for things. But of course, he has not done anything like that.
Well, because that opens you up to legal repercussions. To apologize is to own responsibility. And he's walking a very fine line here, and he's doing it with some pretty expert agility, I got to say. For a guy in his 80s, he's sitting there saying, hey,
90s.
In his 90s now, yeah. He's saying, look, I am definitely not going to say that I went the Thomas Monson route and was starting to lose it, that I don't have full recollection. He's got a very clear, sharp memory, but he's still hiding it. He's still denying it. And so this comes off as extremely sinister, in my opinion.
Absolutely. And then to go out later, it's one thing to have been involved with something like that back in the 70s. I'm not excusing it. But it's another thing to talk about then 50 years later saying, well, we always need to treat persons of the LGBTQ community with kindness and not deal with the huge elephant in the closet. It's just the hypocrisy here is really, really stunning.
Yeah, because all that shows us that the church is unwilling to grow unless it's against its will. This is like dragging a cart behind you that's wheels are locked up. Now, it is really difficult.
Now, Nemo the Mormon, he wrote a letter to President Oaks that was published last year, and he asked him about the discrepancy. And according to Nemo, the email that he got back, President Oaks cited the fairlatterdaysaint.org website, which that is an apologist website, which seemingly basically exonerates President Oaks from the difficulties involved with the difference between his memory and lived reality. Does that help, Al?
Does fair ever help? I feel like it's a good way for the guilty to say, well, this has been addressed. Here's an article addressing it. But it doesn't ever really leave the person who's asking the question feeling satisfied. Absolutely. And I think we see that evidence very much. I am a little curious why Elder Oaks chose not to address Nemo's email publicly at devotional.
Yeah, that's these are all absolutely excellent questions. Now, the second part, the talk was really broken up into two parts, I think. The other part of the talk dealt on marriage and having kids. And the Salt Lake Tribune captured the headline here. And it says, this is their summary: stop delaying marriage and start having kids. Dallin Oaks urges Latter-day Saints. On LGBTQ issues, he holds firm on same-sex attraction, but urges members to treat those facing gender identity challenges with love and dignity. How do you feel about this? How do you feel about the characterization of the young adult devotional?
Oh my goodness, he's out there trying to put out fires. Is what he's doing. He is addressing some real problems that the church is facing. That people are leaving in droves regarding the LGBTQ movement, and shall we say the normalization of it. But he's also addressing the issue that there's a steep decline in members of record being born in the covenant right now because young people can't afford to get married. They're choosing not to get married, and if they do, they're not having nearly as many kids as they did back when he was a young man, and he had to populate and multiply and replenish the earth. But the kids these days aren't doing it, so he has to sit them down and tell them some stories.
Yeah, literally, he's from the baby boomer generation. Remember, he was born in 1932, so at 20 years old.
Right smack in the middle of the Great Depression.
Right, exactly. He would have been at the end of World War II. You know that the advice is to crank out a lot of kids and get married earlier. And like you said, the young children, we have the baby blessings that are released every year. Now, during COVID timeframe, the baby blessings fell off a cliff because people weren't going to the church. And guess what happened with the baby blessings once the COVID lifted? They never recovered. They never recovered to their previous level, and they basically stayed at that incredibly low level. That tells us that the amount of children that are being born into the church and blessed, which is an important step, in your church membership, is extremely limited.
For sure.
Now, the other part of this, he says it's very important to stop delaying marriage and start having kids early. I pulled up a couple of articles on this because we can, sociologists have looked at this issue quite a bit. And, what the effects of if you get married young and if you have kids young, we're talking about, late teenage pregnancies. If you're 18, if you're 19, if you're 20 years old, it puts an incredible, the research on teen pregnancy from, a journal that was published from Pediatrics studied 6,000 Canadian women. And guess what? They experienced high rates of depression. They had significant levels of stress. They had higher rates of suicidal ideation. They had, they were more likely to be victims of mental abuse, of physical abuse. They had poor health outcomes, large levels of depression. They had panic attacks. It's very, very risky to get married early and to have a lot of kids. That's a sociological fact.
Yeah, but Grandpa wants a bigger head count at the next family reunion. So, for his sake, for the one time we get together every 1 to 4 years, have more kids. Well, that takes no consideration whatsoever into account for the mother that has to raise those kids, for the father who's got to be responsible for, providing not just enough roof and food for himself and shoes on the feet, but for other people as well, for that child, for the wife. There's so much of the day to day that is just completely ignored by Elder Oaks on this. He's so aloof, just like, well, I want more babies. Get me more babies. Who's going to raise these kids? Who's going to feed them? Who's going to look after them? Who's going to house them? We've got an entire generation that can't move out of their parents' houses because they can't afford to make enough money to pay to get a house they can rent or an apartment.
I mean, that's one reason that Utah leads the nation in filing for bankruptcy. And I know, people want to say, well, that doesn't have anything to do with the church. In fact, the Midnight Mormons, I was on their live stream recently, and they said, oh, that's just Utah culture. That's not church culture. Well, I can't prove a causation, but I can prove a correlation. When you have lots of kids, when you get married very, very young, it puts an incredible financial strain on you. Physical strain on you, mental strain on you. Yeah. It's an incredibly taxing thing, which is why we have the Journal of Sociology and others have scientifically proven that has poor long-term outcomes for everyone involved.
Oh, absolutely. Because in the state of Utah, what you find is that when you've got someone who's not mentally dealing well with being a parent, is that a lot of times will get taken out on the children. So then you have abuse, you have neglect, you have even worse situations. So I think ideally we would rather bring our Heavenly Father's spirits down into a loving, stable home. But we're not talking about providing a loving, stable home. We're just talking about, hey, whatever we got to do, bring them down.
Yeah. And that's the other thing. So I did a lot of research on this. I'm not a sociologist, but infant mortality increases when your period between births shortens.
Yeah,
okay? And also continuing to give birth at a higher age, that comes with additional risks for both the mother and the child as well.
That's right. It seems like it's kind of ideal to have to do your childbearing in the late 20s, early 30s area.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Kristen, see, we're getting talks here from, again, we got to talk here on LGBTQ issues from someone who has a history of negative interactions with LGBTQ persons. That he's not the right messenger for this particular message. Now we're getting young adult and marriage advice from Kristen Oaks. Well, guess what? She didn't get married young. She was his second wife. Remember, his first wife died.
And this is her first marriage, isn't it?
Right. It's her first
Yeah.
marriage. She married him when she was 53. You're giving advice to young persons to say, get married early, but you didn't do it yourself.
Oh, and I'm guessing she probably didn't work as a midwife or a doula or anything. So next she's going to give advice on childbirth, right?
Well, she doesn't have any of her own children, Al.
Exactly. So that's kind of my point is she's just so unqualified to be giving life advice.
And again, this is a young adult devotional given to us by people who are in their 90s and 80s, from people who didn't marry young, didn't have children, and weren't kind to the LGBTQ community. Okay, I'm a little fired up on this because the messengers that we're getting from this, these are not the right messengers to be sending this potentially harmful advice.
Oh, no. This is equivalent to me coming on to the Mormon News Roundup and saying, let me tell you what you want, Dives. Well, it'd be a lot easier since I have Dives right here in the room with me. How about you tell me what you would want, Dives?
Yeah, I mean, it's another case of do what I say, not what I do. Remember, Dallin Oaks, he did not go on a mission, but that doesn't stop him from telling young men to go on a mission either.
Yep, for sure.
It's just, I don't know. Somebody tweeted this out. Let me share this tweet with you. We had Evan from the Book of Evan on the Mormon News Roundup here a couple of months ago. He runs a very interesting Twitter account, has a lot of good takes here.
Yeah.
And he said, Dallin Oaks in the fireside this past weekend gave a somewhat hands thrown up rant asking, quote, why aren't our single adults getting married, end quote, all while sitting next to his second wife, to whom he is her first husband, for polygamous reasons, one might argue, only a little awkward. So maybe people aren't getting married because they know that polygamy is waiting for them in the afterlife, especially women.
Oh, absolutely. That's still on the books. We may not talk about it very much, but it is definitely on the books.
Now, Al, you don't have any children, right?
I don't have any children, but boy, I descend from polygamists. There's a rather famous in LDS circles picture of John Taylor, or maybe, I think it's George Buchanan in jail, wearing like the white and black stripes garb, and my great grandfather is standing next to him. So.
Wow.
Yeah, they were both in prison for the same reason.
Wow, you got serious Mormon bona fides, Al, for sure. Dallin, both President and Sister Oaks, they talked about how the societal trend of marriage ages is rising, and it's rising every single year, and the birth rate is also declining. Meanwhile, in Provo, Al, I got this meme here. Meanwhile, in Provo, I'm unemployed. I live with my mom. Let's get married and have a baby.
Exactly. Yeah.
Maybe we shouldn't do that again, because I said that the effects of the effects of early marriage, it also corresponds very greatly to future poverty. It's not just about poor health outcomes. It's not just about poor your mental health outcomes. It's not just about those things. You are more likely to end up in a life in poverty from entering into marriage earlier. And it's just, it's very troubling advice for me.
Well, it's because when you get married and make that kind of a commitment, you would think, okay, well, that just doubles the amount of food that you need. It doubles the amount of living space that you need. It doubles the amount of cars. Well, you don't even need 2 cars. You can sell one and just, share a car, right? But that's not exactly true, because when you're single, you can move into, say, an apartment that has multiple roommates. Not every apartment complex or apartment situation is going to be friendly to a couple moving in with a bunch of single people. Not to mention that can make things really awkward for the living circumstances there. So you do have to be able to afford your own independent living space. You have to be able to, provide for yourselves. And then there's that possibility, especially when they talk about make babies as fast as you can, that starts to grow exponentially with kid after kid after kid.
It definitely does. Now, here is the charts that he brought up. The percent of married U.S. adults back in 1990, it used to be that 78% of females got married in 1990. That's fallen to 70% now. And back in 1990, it used to be that males 71% got married, and now only 62% are getting married. Mm-hmm. And also, the average age of first marriage for church members has been increasing. Back in the 1970s, it was about 22 years old. Now the average age is 27 years old.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, really, because it all comes down to, RFM has talked about how the entire plan of salvation revolves around the heterosexual sex act. And I know that sounds kind of crass, but because it does, getting married, having children early, that's extremely important to your eternal progression. Yeah. And any delay in that could take you off the covenant path. Now, it may have poor outcomes for you physically, mentally, financially, but that doesn't matter, because the only thing that matters is church obedience.
Yeah. The divorce rate, here's another thing that is an interesting statistic to throw out there. The divorce rate for the LDS is exactly the same as for non-LDS. So it's not like people within the church are getting married and staying married. They're actually getting divorced about the same rate. I think it's somewhere between 50 and 60%.
Except for, Al, I know this, except for temple marriages are far less likely to end in divorce. 80% of temple marriages make it through.
That's true.
So that's the caveat.
Yeah, that is a caveat. Yeah. But to look at so we're talking about statistics back in the 70s. Well, those children who were born in the 70s are in their 40s to 50s now. Most of them are in their 50s. But, they're having kids, or their parents themselves. Some of these kids, at least, let's just say half of them came from divorced families. Well, divorces are a pretty significant thing to put any child through. And, so you're getting an entire generation of people that are associated with seeing all the messiness of divorce. They want to avoid that like the plague. So rather than getting married and making a quick decision like their parents did in their early 20s, they're putting it off until their late 20s. And, just let me take a little bit more time and, look into this and make sure that I'm making a good decision and not just jump right into it.
Yeah. Sure. I mean, if you think about the LDS conception of the plan of salvation, the idea that you're supposed to have a lot of kids as a Mormon man and wife in particular is because you need to bring those souls into good Mormon families so that they'll grow up in the church and be able to return back to their Heavenly Father. That's the conception. The issue here is, if the plan of salvation is fair, let's say that you and your wife, Al, you never have children, or let's say that I decide not to have any more children, but we were supposed to have some. Let's just... If we were supposed to have it, if the plan of salvation is fair, then those kids would still be sent to LDS families, just to be a different family. It's not like they're going to miss out. The idea, it's just very, very confusing for me to say, okay, well, I didn't have the proper number of children. Therefore, the child that I was supposed to have is going to be sent to, I don't know, a Mumbai slum or someone who's not a member, and therefore they're never going to get to hear the gospel, and they're going to end up in the celestial kingdom. How in the world is that fair?
Oh, it's not fair. And furthermore, for especially someone in my situation who's, we don't have kids for medical reasons. How is that fair to my wife? How's that supposed to make her feel? That's such a personal insult to say, well, because you didn't get married young and have as many kids as you could right away, the Heavenly Father, the God of all creation, who's ever knowing and ever loving and in control of everything, all powerful, able to, reach in and miraculously fix what's medically wrong with you. He's not going to fix what's medically wrong with you. Instead, he's going to take your spirit children. He's going to take your kids from you that you could have had and give them to somebody else. That is a huge slap in the face to somebody who ended up with a medical problem that they didn't choose. My wife didn't choose to have issues that required a hysterectomy, but it happened, and we dealt with it. We live with it, and she still lives with it. She still bears the scars, both on her body and on her heart from that, and she deals with it every day. So to hear things like that be thrown around by a 90-year-old man who's never given childbirth himself and just is completely aloof, it's extremely insensitive, extremely calloused.
especially from his wife who had no children.
There's another one, by choice.
Right?
Yeah.
But she didn't have children, but she's going to lecture us about the benefits of that. And of course, in the young adult devotional, she never deals with it herself. She said, well, I never had children, and I always struggle with it. No, she just brushes it over. If you didn't research it, you wouldn't know.
Exactly. Yeah.
And the Deseret News put out this editorial here just a couple of months ago that talks about Tucker Carlson, the disgraced Fox News host, who we have his emails where they were extremely insensitive to women. He had emails that were extremely racist. But, Tucker Carlson, he wants us to have Mormon levels of kids. Is that good advice? And Al, I don't think you've read this Deseret News article, but I bet you can guess what the answer to it is.
I'm guessing that because it's the Deseret News, they're saying, yes, it's great advice.
Yes, sure.
Myself personally, I think maybe Tucker Carlson ought to look into what it means to be a Mormon and to have those Mormon levels of kids before making a statement like that. It seems like he's running off half-cocked to me. Yeah.
And the Daily Universe released here how the General Conference and also how messaging in particular to LDS women has changed over the years. And LDS, the keywords mentioned in General Conference and addresses like this young adult devotional, there was a big push back in the 80s for homemaking, but, we don't mention that anymore. And it used to be that women should be homemakers, but again, we don't mention that. And birth control, what happened with birth control, Al?
Oh, yeah. Birth control became a big issue. And then they just kind of stopped talking about it, right?
Oops.
we were like Catholic levels against birth control when it first came out. And then all of a sudden, like, oh, maybe, we'll just, we'll stop talking about it.
Yeah. So to Dallin Oaks, if, having lots of kids is so important, how come he's not talking about the evils of birth control? That's what I'm wondering.
Yeah, for sure.
And the mention of family. So what we've replaced all that with is mentions of family and, kind of a mention of motherhood. So the messaging has changed in some ways, but in some ways it's still always the same.
Yeah. And I think that it's really interesting, especially to see how homemaking and homemakers got wiped out, because I'm sure you remember that, like, every Wednesday or one Wednesday night a month, the Relief Society women would get together for homemaking. And then that changed in the 90s to enrichment. And they moved away from homemaking. I'm not sure exactly why they moved away from the vernacular of homemaking, but maybe it's because there was such a stigma, like that a stay-at-home wife or mother, that they weren't as significant, or just that was all that they were about, was just making a nice home. It's not a very feminist concept.
That's for sure. No doubt about it. Now, This last week, I was actually talking to my daughter who's 20 years old. And she said for the first time to me, Al, she said, you know what? My grandma, or my mother, her grandmother was talking to her while we were doing something. And my daughter told my grandmother while I was there, she said, you know what? I don't plan on ever having children in this life. You know what? And I was a little bit, that gave me a little bit of cause for pause. And it kind of made me sad in some respects, because I said, I don't know, I kind of want to be a grandpa. But then on the other hand, the world, it doesn't really need a lot more people in it. So am I just being selfish about this, or how should I have responded?
It's perfectly normal to feel however you feel about something. So, I understand very much the desire to want to hear a young voice call you daddy, or to, have a little baby want to look up at you and call you pop or whatever. Your grandpa, granddad, whatever you want to go by. So I am very sympathetic to people with that plight. When I look at my own situation, that's something that struck me really hard with the issues of not being able to have kids, is I'll never hear a little voice call me daddy. I'll never hear somebody call me grandpa or pop or whatever you're going to go by. And that's just part of my reality, but that's just a part of it. It's not the whole thing. It doesn't really diminish my life the way I see it. I do have the capacity to influence children, and to spread love to children, and to I've got neighbors that have kids, and I've got friends that have grandkids, and I've got nephews, I've got nieces, I've got a whole bunch of avenues. There's foster children that we volunteer with. We've gotten involved with the Girl Scouts, and there's just so many ways to bless the lives of children, and to provide them with another good influence in their life, because there are studies out there showing that any adult that's a good influence can really make a difference in the life of a child. And it doesn't have to be your own.
Yeah, that's true. My own personal experience I got married quite young. I had 4 children, I think, under the age of 7. It's incredibly stressful, especially since my wife had to stay at home. I was working multiple jobs. I was working so much. I was working like 80, 90 hours a week. I missed a lot of my children's memories. I didn't get to see them. I volunteered for military deployments because I wanted that extra money, and I was away from home for long periods of time. It was very stressful on my wife, who's at home by herself with no husband around, raising lots of children. It was incredibly stressful. And, honestly, it's hard to say if I could go back and repeat it. Maybe I would have done things differently. I don't know.
Oh, it's absolutely stressful. And that's something that I don't think that Elder Oaks is addressing. I think that that's a big issue that's being skirted around, is the stress involved. And that, it really takes a toll on you. It taxes you to raise kids because you have to do what you have to do, as you know. You know better than I do that. That's exactly what you said. Yeah. So,
it probably all comes down to this, Al, and we'll just conclude on this. There are well-documented physiological, sociological, mental, and economic downsides to getting married and having lots of kids. But there are positive church outcomes in activity rates, tithing receipts, and retention rates. Hence, Oak's views of giving potentially damaging advice like this, he views it as okay so long as the needs of the church come first. It's a philosophy that's called doctrine over self. What's best for you spiritually, socially, physically, that must be subverted to the betterment of the collective whole. And that is the very definition of a high demand religion. Any last thoughts on this young adult devotional, Al?
It sounds very much like it's echoing the thoughts about tithing, that it's far better for you to go hungry or to miss a car payment, to miss a paying your bills by paying your tithing. Just make sure that whatever you do, the church comes first, and that you pay the church first. The church gets what it wants, and then just make your own desires and wants secondary to that.
That is a fantastic sum up. And let me just say one other thing about this for my concluding thoughts. And I probably should have prefaced this at the beginning. But before we leave this devotional, we need to make a note that any moral or ethical message from President Oaks should have been prefaced with a reminder that he helped perpetuate a multi-billion-dollar, decades-long investment deception, which ended up getting the church and Ensign Peak Advisors, the church's investment fund, fined $5 million from the Security and Exchange Commission. Now, I know Oaks only entered the first presidency in 2018, but he was still complicit in this entire endeavor. So hence, any moral or ethical teaching that he gives to us is tainted, especially since he has not explained or apologized for his behavior in any meaningful way.
This former justice that sat on the Utah Supreme Court, that's who this is, that was complicit in breaking the law that got the church fined.
Yep. And now he's giving us moral and ethical advice.
Yeah.
Right. And again, from his wife, who never got married, never had children, she's telling us to get married young, have lots of children. See, just the messengers here. And again, this is a young adult devotional for people who are presumably in their early 20s from someone in their 90s. The messaging here, the messengers, they're just miles apart from where they need to be.
And unless they fix that, the church will continue to crumble like it is.
Now, another article that came out this week also talked about the most closeted state in America. And this kind of dovetails to our last article because President Oaks talked a great deal about LGBTQ issues. And this was from thepeaknews.com. And the most closeted state in America, Al, I'll give you one guess as to what the most closeted state is.
I'm guessing it's not West Virginia.
No. It was very interesting, though. It is Utah, obviously. Spoiler alert. But it was interesting how they came up with this, because how do you actually survey how can you do that? Well, they went to Google and they had people, they checked for these terms. Am I gay? Am I lesbian? Am I trans? Am I non-binary? And if you're having to Google those things, then most likely you're more likely to be a closeted person. And that really, if you go back to our last article with President Oakes, where he talked about how we need to treat everybody kindly, but no, we do gender shock therapy on people, and we don't have them be full-fledged members of our family. We can see why Utah is so high in being closeted.
Oh, absolutely, because Utah teaches, or at least during my childhood, it taught very strictly that, okay, you are what you are when you were assigned it at birth. And so if you're a boy, you will be attracted to girls. If you're going to the dance, boys will dance with girls and girls will dance with boys, regardless of what you're stimulated by. I mean, if you're turned on by males, then maybe you're gay. If you're turned on by females, maybe you're a lesbian. And it's okay to ask these questions, but I find it really interesting that people are having to Google that question. Am I gay? You're asking Google if you're sexually attracted to people of your same gender? I mean, to me, it seems like it's pretty obvious. But then again, that's just me. I'm not unsympathetic to people who are in this predicament. In fact, I'm very sympathetic because of the way that they were brought up and because of the messages around them, because there is that dichotomy in there. They're feeling one way, but they're being told another. So yeah, reach out to the internet, see what the internet has to say, because Google knows everything. Google can tell you if you're gay or if you're trans or if you're non-binary, because you're certainly not going to get that from Grandpa Oakes.
Definitely not. I sent that article to my gay brother who now lives in Las Vegas, and he was raised in Utah along with me, and he is not at all surprised. I don't think anyone is surprised by the results of that particular study.
Yeah, your brother is the one I really want to get his opinion of that.
Yeah, definitely. Now, our next article here is this is a cool article here. Latter-day Saint teen wins American Idol. Now, he is the second person here. We had David Archuleta who won American Idol. Gee, that was so long ago. That must have been 12 years ago? I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's been a long time.
Yeah, it's been a long time. But season 21 concluded with a historic winner. Latter-day Saint Ian Tonke became the youngest male ever to win the show. He's from Hawaii. He won over the judges since his very first audition. He's extremely young here, and he has a beautiful singing voice. I'm going to play a very short clip here of him. I don't want to get a copyright strike, so let's just listen to a couple of seconds here of him. This is when They announced him. He came on. He sang. Let's listen to that.
I'm addicted to your loving, but if you should know.
But what's your reaction here, Al?
Oh my goodness, this guy could be another Israel. Cousin Is, the guy that sang Somewhere Over the Rainbow that everybody knows.
Yeah.
He looks like him. He sounds like him. Boy, he's got a great voice.
Yeah, he does. He's very humble. He was a real crowd favorite. I think it's a real special moment when he goes out on stage. His family ends up joining him on stage, and they sing along with him. It's a really cool celebration, and he shares the microphone with them. I'm just going to play a couple more seconds of this. He's sharing the spotlight with his family.
As long as you don't let go.
Really cool story here from nice to see this winner. And I figured you might enjoy that one since you served your mission in Hawaii. You're pretty familiar with the Hawaiian people.
He's from Kahuku. I don't know that I know the family, but I did serve in Kahuku.
Wow.
Yeah, so I was from his neighborhood, or served in his neighborhood for a little bit.
Wow. Well, what island is that on?
That's right by Laie on Oahu. Yeah. It's right by the temple. Yeah,
that's an extremely stronghold of members there.
Laie is like a second Utah. It's that kind of concentration of LDS.
Well, I wish him the very best. Congratulations to him. I'm sure he's going to sign big record deals, and he's going to become an international sensation. I guess he's going to pick up the torch where David Archuleta left it, since David Archuleta has signaled, and his mom also, that David Archuleta said that he is, quote, done with the church. So.
Yeah, and that's fair. I understand where he's coming from. So, I think this young man's name's Iam, IAM. Yeah. Maybe he'll do some research on the history of Iosepa, Utah, and someday that'll be his way out.
Yeah, I've been to Iosepa. It's almost a sacred place to visit.
It is. It's such a tragic story. Yeah.
Yeah, it is.
A community of Hawaiian islanders came to Utah because during the time that was the word was the saints should gather. So these people from Hawaii came to Utah, but they encountered a lot of blatant racism. They weren't allowed in restaurants or hotels. And so the church was like, well, we got to do something with them. So they sent them out to like Tooele, out in the middle of nowhere, and built this little community of Iosepa.
Yeah.
Interesting history.
Yeah, it sure is. Now, our next story here is the Cody Enterprise has released an article here. This was published on May 22nd by Morgan Phillips. Neighbors have LDS temple concerns. So this is a Terry Skinner here. He said, first and foremost, it's not personal or against all LDS faithful whatsoever. It's about what's doing right in the neighborhood. So the church is wanting to build a temple there in Cody, Wyoming. But, they're getting a great deal of pushback, which is pretty surprising since Wyoming is directly in the Mordor. Yeah.
There's a huge LDS population in Cody. It is in Mordor. They're a couple hundred miles from Rexburg, Idaho, and it's right along the Wasatch Front there. Well, I guess it's not the Wasatch Front when you get up that north, but it is. It's just on the other side of Yellowstone from Rexburg, so it's not that far. And the people are mad, and I can understand why, because Cody, Wyoming is cowboy country. It's wide open range. There's the Rocky Mountains up there, but beautiful scenery. And they're talking about putting a temple that sticks 100 feet high into the air with its spire. And that's going to change the landscape. It's going to change the scenery. It's going to change the view. Recently, the Heber City Temple, the LDS Church was able to force their way into getting the ability to destroy the night sky with their light pollution because they want to make their temple glow. And so they got their way there. Now they're doing the same thing in Cody, Wyoming, and people are just upset. They're like, no, we don't need this big, gaudy edifice sticking its big spire straight up into our sky here. We need to keep it country, keep it, there's plenty of other places they can put it without upsetting the view.
Yeah, that's what the master plan said, that the Skinner says that he wants to protect the existing character of the area, and that even though this temple is only 13,000 square feet, it's still going to be quite large. I don't know. The temple itself is one story, so it's like 40 feet. The spire is like 30 feet, so maybe it's like 70, 80 feet in the air.
Oh,
but but that's still going to be higher than any other edifice in the surrounding area. Yeah. And people they were scheduled to have a public hearing on that, where they were going to talk about it, but it was postponed because the church withdrew its application for the project. So this is in a kind of an example here of at the grassroots level, people are saying, we don't want our dark skies polluted. We don't want the special character of our area upset. And the church withdrew. And the plans are that the church said that they're going to resubmit these plans in the future. But it seems like a small victory here for the people who were wanting to get rid of this temple.
Yeah, that's something that I find really interesting. I wonder how much attention it's going to get when the church resubmits it, if they're going to change the location, because that seems to be the whole beef is that they just want it to go to a different location. They don't want it out in this beautiful, like wide open, what is it? It's not a turnpike, but it is like a highway out there. And that's what the community wants, but we'll see where the church decides to put it.
Yeah, well, if they get approval to do it, there seems to be quite a bit of backlash. And the open house, which had been scheduled, according to my source, it's not 100%, but the open house that usually happens when a new church is dedicated, that's been postponed as well. Everything has been postponed on this because of the significant backlash. The church is really realizing that they are not the big kingpin that they once were. They used to be able to push temples through with ease. Now they're finding resistance even in Heber City and even in Cody, Wyoming.
Yeah. It's surprising.
Yeah, it is. Now we got 2 last articles to get here through, Al, and this one caught my eye here. This was from the Evening Standard here, and again, we find the most unusual. Most unusual articles here. If you want to submit an article to us, send us an email to kolob@mormonnewsroundup.org. We would love to hear your article, and while you're at it, please drop us a like, drop us a subscription here. But the church here is involved, and it bought up an Amazon warehouse in the United Kingdom, the Wembley, I believe that is in England, Wembley Amazon warehouse for 74 million pounds, which I guess that'd be like $100 million via its charitable company. It's $100 million building, Al. That's that is one heck of a building.
Yeah, and it's the church once again owns no women's shelters, no free hospital clinics, no soup kitchens, no homeless shelters. The church does own a lot of real estate that's commercial, and here's another example that the church just added $100 million onto that pile, but no charitable buildings. I find that interesting, that the charitable arm of the church is buying a lot of commerce.
I would say that the church does own a number of charitable buildings. Welfare Square, for instance, is entirely devoted to charity. The bishop's storehouses are entirely devoted to charity. Yeah. And a number of the church farms, virtually all of the proceeds that go towards charity. So I would count those as charitable holdings as well.
Okay, I stand corrected on that.
But what you're saying is when the church makes big purchases, when the church, as the Kent Industrial Washington complex that was bought last year, which was, I want to say it was a $300 million purchase.
Yeah.
When the church really shells out the cash, oftentimes it goes to these commercial ventures. And I found it interesting that they said that it was bought by one of the church's investment arms called Covenant Gardens, which I wasn't familiar with that company at all. It just shows you that even though I try to follow this space as well as I can, I'm not familiar with all these investment arms and everything that's happening. It's extremely opaque. This is not released on the church news. It's not on Deseret News. You only find out about this if you subscribe to this Evening Standard in the United Kingdom. You know, the church is just a huge kingpin in the United States when it comes to real estate. They're the number one holder of private real estate by total net worth in the United States, and they're probably the number 2 by number of acres owned in the United States. The church is just a real estate kingpin.
It really is.
And I wonder, what are they going to be doing with this? Now, what they did with the Kent Industrial Washington complex is they bought it, and then they kept all the tenants, and now those tenants are, instead of paying money to, I think that they bought that from, I want to say Bill Gates. I can't remember who they bought it from. But they bought this from Amazon. They'll probably keep the tenants as well. And they'll just, instead of paying money to Amazon, they're going to pay money to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I mean, we're rubbing shoulders here, Al, with Amazon, with Bill Gates, with, the church owns $1 billion in Tesla, in Google. I mean, these are the biggest players in the world, and the church is right there feeding at the trough.
That's right. And so Russell M. Nelson, we can add him to the names like, Warren Buffett, Bill Gates, Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos. Yep.
Without question. He sits very comfortably at that table.
Yeah.
And if you think about the church as a corporation soul, he'd actually be the head of that table because Elon Musk, he's only worth like, what is that, 125 billion. But if you put all of the church as a corporation soul, if you think that really President Nelson really owns the entire church of Ensign Peak is currently valued at $165 billion, and the church's real estate portfolio is about $110 billion, $270 billion. He's the head of the table, and the rest of those guys, they need to wait for him to sit down before they start eating.
That's right.
Speaking of money, now our last article here, Al, speaking of money, the Widow's Mite Report released an interesting analysis, speaking of money, of Ensign Peak, which is the church's investment arm, and their U.S. stocks performance and positioning.
Yeah.
So Ensign Peak, it directed its U.S. stock portfolio. Its direct U.S. stock portfolio ended Q1 in 2023. That's the quarter that just ended, and it was valued at $46.2 billion. But of course, remember, Al, this is only the domestic stock options which the church is required to disclose. There is a number of other parts of Ensign Peak, according to David Nielsen, which are not publicly available, such as commercial real estate, such as bonds, such as foreign investments, such as other things. So just the domestic portion of it alone that the church has admitted and acknowledged to being to holding these positions is $46.2 billion. That's pretty. That's impressive.
Yeah, it's very impressive.
Sure is. Now, the portfolio returns were 5.1% in quarter one. But this is the big caveat, and we've seen this time and time again, Al. Guess what? It underperformed the S&P, who the returns to the first quarter of 2023, the stock market was really recovered and doing well. S&P was getting 7.5%, but the church's portfolio, it only returned 5.1.
Yeah. Was that 2.4% less?
Yeah.
So I thought that the LDS Church was led by inspired people that had a direct link up to deity that knew the end from the beginning.
That is a very interesting point, Al, and one that I cannot disagree with you. Now, according to the Widow's Mite report, which you can go over to widowsmite.wordpress.com and find this, and these are all linked into our show notes as well. The sector bets related to tech, energy, and financials drove the poor relative performance. Now, let's go on to slide number 2 here. Relative to the market. So this slide here shows how is Ensign Peak performing with regards to the S&P 500, which is the 500 biggest stocks in the Dow Jones. Well, relative to the market, quarter one was the worst 3-month period since consolidated reporting began. Consolidated reporting means when the church got rid of the 13 shell companies and reported everything under Ensign Peak. And this is how this graph shows, is Ensign Peak outperforming the Dow or underperforming the Dow? And guess what? If we go to this section here, where 2023, they are underperforming the Dow by the most significant margin of whenever the returns started becoming public.
Yeah, that's quite a spike. It looks like a dagger going down there. Almost looks like a needle. I mean, it's not even broad. This thing's a sharp drop.
Yeah, it sure is. Now, the third slide here, it talks about, so with the S&P 500, if you just want to invest in the S&P 500, then you can use the index weight, which says what percentage of the different companies within the S&P 500 do you want to have stocks in. You don't have all 500 of them be perfectly even.
Yeah,
it's a weighted, because some of them are larger than others. You know, you don't want to have the same percentage in the 500 as the first.
Yeah.
Okay. So the weight that you would have for these particular stocks, the index weight for Apple, for instance, is 7.1, but Ensign Peak, it's at 5.4, so it's underweight by 1.7. So they've gone in. They don't just follow the S&P 500 perfectly. They have weights as to whether they're going to buy more of a stock or less than a stock. And so the weights here, this is the reason that the church has lost so much money, is that their weighting scheme was really, really poor.
Yeah, it's they're a little bit off here. So, for example, Apple, the number one, the weight in the S&P 500 is 7.1%. By comparison, the LDS Church's Ensign Peak weight is 5.4%. So they're a little lighter than them there. Microsoft would be next, 6.2%, and then the Ensign Peak's at 4.6%. So they haven't invested as much in the right companies, and they've invested a little too much in the wrong companies.
Exactly right. Now, the church is overweight, meaning that they really like, the church really likes financials and the energy sector, and the church hates the tech sector and is underweight in tech. Now, I can think of a pretty easy reason as to why that might be the case. What do you think, Al? Why do they love financials and energy and are underweight in tech, which is the reason that they lost so much money relative to the S&P 500?
The internet has not been the LDS Church's friend, I'll tell you that. Google especially has been a big thorn in the church's side. And energy, boy, we're always going to need energy. That's what makes the world go around. You can't power a light bulb without power. So
yeah, well, I'm just going out here on a limb, but when most of your people who are controlling this fund are presumably in their 90s, they're not exactly the most tech savvy people on the planet. I'm going out on a limb here to just speculate about that. But they're anti-tech, probably because they're so old.
Yeah, and they're probably still hoping that it's just a passing craze.
The
bottom's going to fall out of it.
Yeah, that's interesting. Now, there's 2 more slides to go along with this, and I find this to be the most interesting out of the entire slides here. So financial stocks fell after the abrupt failure of Silicon Valley Bank, which happened just a couple of months ago. So Silicon Valley Bank basically went bankrupt. It couldn't pay its bills. It basically had to be bailed out by the federal government. And shortly after the Silicon Valley Bank went bankrupt, well, Signature Bank went bankrupt, and First Republic Bank also went bankrupt.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So all of these guys went they went bankrupt. The problem here is that the church, according to this, they didn't anticipate any of these failures that were going to happen.
Yeah.
That's the problem. It doesn't
by
seem,
surprise.
it doesn't seem like Ensign Peak's managers, and by extension, senior church leaders, they can't seem to predict the future of what is going to happen and know that, we need to pull out of the financial portion of Ensign Peak because the stocks, we're going to see a big run on the financial sector is going to be cratering. And instead, we need to be putting our money into tech, which did very well. We can't seem to see the future in the managing of these funds whatsoever.
No, they really need somebody with the gift of prophecy behind the wheel there.
And that's what I'm wondering. Does the Lord not want his church to outpace the S&P 500? Would he not want that?
Well, I guess you can't serve God and mammon or money. I'm trying to think of anything to stand on there.
or are his prophets, seers, and revelators and managers, are they not able to discern the will of the Lord with regards to his financial wishes? Well, because if we had just put Ensign Peak's money into the S&P 500 with the normal weights, we would have been up $2 billion.
Well, exactly. And a lot of the justification that the church hands out for sitting on billions, hundreds of billions of dollars is that, the church is led by the Lord. So, of course, they're prosperous. Of course, they're doing so well. But they're not doing that well. They're not doing the best.
No.
And you would expect that if the Lord is in competition with the S&P 500, that the Lord is going to outpace them, not underpace them.
One would expect that to be so.
Yeah.
So this is the issue here. Major hedge funds and large investment portfolios, the Berkshire Hathaways and those other places, they employ the best of the best. And those investment bankers, they usually travel the world. They're carefully watching the management personally of these companies. They're going to Apple, they're going to Google, they're going to Tesla, and they're getting briefings so that they know what's happening with these funds so that they can know, should we be adjusting our weight up or down? They spend a great deal of money and time and travel to do that. And guess what? To my knowledge, the church has never sent any of its investment managers to any of these companies. It's never been leaked that Mormon officials are meeting with Apple or that Mormon officials are meeting with Tesla or Google so that we know whether we're supposed to be adjusting these weighted values to get the best bang for our buck. Remember, this is the widow's mite.
Yeah.
The church owns $1 billion of stock in Apple, but to my knowledge, they've never gone to Apple headquarters to check on the management or pour over the books or see what Tim Cook has up his sleeves. As a major shareholder, when you own $1 billion of stock, that presumably you have access to some of these senior company leaders like Tim Cook himself and say, what's going on with the company? Should we be investing in you? The church doesn't do any of that.
Yeah, and before investing the consecrated sacred funds that the widows have donated for the and entrusted the church with.
Exactly. Yeah. So, it does not appear that Ensign Peak follows the best practice in the industry. That is best practice to maximize the investment knowledge and therefore returns. Now, and this is important. Even after the hedge fund became known, they didn't do it. So before the hedge fund, when it was secret, when no one knew about it, they really couldn't go around and do these site visits and really be a big player in the market because they wanted to stay hidden, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So, now that the cat's out of the bag, why have we not returned to industry best practices to monitor these companies and make sure that we're at least matching the S&P 500 or preferably outpacing it? Why haven't we returned to best practices now that the jig is up and everybody knows about Ensign Peak? What are we waiting for?
I don't know, because one would think that that would at least raise it, even if they're not up at the exact same level with the S&P 500, that they'd be able to raise it, close that gap by 1% or 2%.
Yeah. We're talking about billions of dollars here. Closing the gap by even 1% is a significant effort.
It's more than you and I will make together in our lifetimes.
You can hire 100 of these investment bankers to go out and be more with the pulse on the finger of the market. And if you raise it even 1% with 100 additional bankers, you've way made your profit back.
Yeah, for sure.
So this is the issue. I've been thinking about this particular slide a lot. I guess the argument could be made that Ensign Peak doesn't need to employ the financial industry's best practices, because the Lord's sacred stewards, they don't need worldly input to manage the widow's mite. They can do so with prayer and priesthood power. However, the unfortunate situation is that the results don't show that.
That's very true. Well, maybe if they weren't looking at the pornography so much. I'm sorry, I gotta throw that little dig out there.
Oh, man.
I mean, what else can you gonna do to justify this or make it make sense?
Yeah, and don't forget last year, Al, that Ensign Peak was losing at lost 3 quarters in a row last year, over $1 billion, 3 quarters in a row. And now that the stock market has rebounded, we're not catching up. This is just we had the poor management of Ensign Peak all along, and people are like, "Well, now we're doing it right." No, we're not. This is still a complete and utter mess.
What this looks like is the Book of Mormon cycle of apostasy, because prosperity, we're on the curve where prosperity is ending and pride has taken over. So the Lord's going to start to humble the people.
Yeah, the last slide on this, it says, remember, only direct holdings in U.S. stocks are disclosed by the church. And the current U.S. stockholders, stock holdings imply that total Ensign Peak investments are around 158 to 175 billion. And the estimates for that will continue to grow. Most likely estimate of total assets managed by Ensign Peak will cross $200 million here $200 billion in short order. Any last thoughts on Ensign Peak performing? It has performed poorly from its inception by hiding, by not filing proper forms, and now by lagging behind the S&P 500. This debacle and mess, it continues to drag on.
Yeah, I guess I'm left with the question, is the existence of Ensign Peak itself the will of the Lord? I'm curious. I don't know.
I wonder that, along with a lot of other things. You know, Al, we are going to release our new episodes for the Mormon News Roundup every Sunday night, 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. That's when you can interact with the live chat. We'd love to invite you to be a part of that. It will be released then. And I want to thank you so much, Al, for coming back on the Mormon News Roundup. I know you're going to be coming on in another couple months, but thanks so much for being here.
I love our listeners so much. It's this is one of my passions, is just, talking about the LDS news and how it affects Mormonism worldwide. So thank you very much for having me on, and I look forward to talking to our guests in the future.
Now, shout out to Weird Alma, the prophet of the new disputation, for this episode's music. And thanks so much for ruminating with us on the Great and Spacious Beehive. And remember, no unhallowed hand can stop this podcast from progressing. So long.
When it comes to nicknames of the church, such as LDS Church, the Mormon Church, to remove the Lord's name from the Lord's church is a major victory for Satan.
Satan.